Picture this. You wake up. No alarm because alarms don't exist yet. No coffee because coffee is still a wild bean somewhere in Ethiopia that nobody's figured out yet. And before you've eaten a single bite, you already know today involves walking. A lot of walking. Not a stroll to the mailbox. Not a lap around the block for your step count. We're talking somewhere between 12 and 20 miles on foot, often barefoot or in shoes made from animal hide, across terrain that has zero interest in being comfortable for you. And here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't some brutal outlier hike that one unlucky caveman had to do once. This was Tuesday. This was every single day for basically the entire existence of our species, until roughly 5 minutes ago on the evolutionary clock. So the question practically begs itself. Why? Why would anyone, ancient or otherwise, choose to hoof it 20 miles a day when sitting still is so obviously the better option? Spoiler alert, they didn't really choose it in the way we choose to go to the gym. It chose them. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how walking that far, that often quietly built the human body, the human brain, and honestly, human society itself. Let's start with the number, because 20 miles sounds almost made up. That's like walking from downtown to the far edge of a mid-sized city and back with some detours. If you tried that today, you'd be limping, complaining, and probably posting about it. But anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza people of Tanzania have tracked exactly how far these communities move in a normal day of foraging. And the numbers land right around that 10 to 15 mile mark on average, with plenty of days pushing past 20, especially for the men doing long-range hunting. Now, the Hadza aren't literally ancient humans frozen in time. Nobody's claiming that. But they live in a way that's remarkably close to how our ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years before agriculture showed up and ruined everyone's cardio routine. So researchers use groups like the Hadza as a window, a rough approximation, into what daily movement looked like for most of human history. And that window shows constant motion, not jogging, not sprinting, just walking almost endlessly in service of staying alive. Here's where it gets almost funny, in a bleak sort of way. We think of exercise as something you schedule. You put on special shoes, you go to a special building, sometimes you pay a monthly fee for the privilege. Ancient humans had none of that separation. Walking wasn't exercise. Walking was just what life required. There was no gym membership because the entire world was the gym, and the entry fee was your continued survival. So let's actually break down what was pulling people out of camp and across the landscape every single day, because it wasn't one single reason. It was a whole tangle of them, all pointing in the same direction. Move or don't eat. Reason number one, and the biggest one by far, food doesn't deliver itself. Before farming, before grocery stores, before that guy on the app bringing you fries at midnight, every calorie a person consumed had to be tracked down, dug up, chased, or picked. And food in the wild is not conveniently clustered in one spot waiting for you. It's scattered. A patch of berries here, a root vegetable there, a herd of animals somewhere over that ridge that may or may not still be there by the time you arrive. Hunter-gatherers had what researchers call a foraging radius, basically an invisible circle around their camp representing how far they were willing and able to travel in search of food on a given day. And that radius wasn't small. Depending on the season and the local environment, groups would range for miles in every direction, then return to camp, then head out again the next day, often in a completely different direction because yesterday's patch of food is picked clean today. Think about that for a second. Every day was a fresh math problem. Where did we already forage? Where hasn't been touched? Where are the animals likely to be based on water sources and weather? And the answer to that math problem was rarely conveniently close by. It was almost always walk there and find out. Reason number two, and this one's a personal favorite because it's borderline absurd when you say it out loud. Some ancient humans hunted by literally walking their prey to death. It's called persistence hunting. And it sounds like a joke until you realize it actually worked and still works today in a few remaining communities. Here's the concept. Humans are terrible sprinters. A deer, an antelope, basically anything with 4 legs and hooves will smoke us in a flat-out race every single time. But here's the twist. Most 4-legged animals cool themselves primarily through panting, and panting doesn't really work while you're at a full gallop. So they have to stop, cool down, then run again. Humans, on the other hand, sweat all over our body through millions of sweat glands that most other mammals simply don't have in that quantity. Combine that with the fact that we're upright, we're relatively hairless, and we can maintain a steady jog for hours without needing to fully stop, and suddenly the tortoise and the hare fable starts looking like a documentary. A group of hunters would identify an animal, then simply follow it. Not sprint after it, follow it. Keep it moving. Keep it from resting properly. Keep it from cooling down. Hour after hour, sometimes for 20 or 30 miles, until the animal's body simply gave out from heat exhaustion. That is an unbelievable amount of walking and light jogging for a single meal. And it tells you something important, which is that human endurance wasn't a nice bonus feature evolution threw in. It was a hunting weapon, arguably our first real weapon, long before spears and arrows got involved. Reason number 3, water. This one seems obvious once you say it, but it's easy to forget how much modern life has spoiled us. You want water, you turn a handle. Ancient humans wanted water, they needed to know exactly where the nearest reliable source was, and that source might be a few miles from camp, and it might dry up seasonally, forcing an even longer walk to the next known spot. Entire settlement patterns were basically built around this single question. Where's the water? Camps got placed near rivers and springs when possible, but even then, daily trips to fetch water, wash, or intercept animals that were also coming to drink added yet another layer of walking onto an already long day. And speaking of animals coming to drink, that overlaps beautifully with reason number 1, because smart hunters knew that water sources were also excellent ambush points. 2 birds, 1 very long walk. Reason number 4, and this is the one people underestimate the most, seasons. Ancient humans weren't just wandering random. In many regions, they were following an entire seasonal calendar written into the landscape itself. Certain plants only fruited at certain times of year in certain locations. Certain animals migrated along predictable routes as temperatures shifted. If you wanted to eat consistently throughout the year, you couldn't just stay put. You had to move with the food. This is where things start connecting to something bigger than just individual survival. Entire groups would relocate their camps multiple times a year, following herds, chasing ripening plants, avoiding harsh weather in one area by moving toward milder conditions somewhere else. We're not talking about a quick jog anymore. We're talking about multi-day, sometimes multi-week journeys, hauling whatever belongings and children the group had across sometimes brutal terrain, because staying in one place too long meant the local area would eventually stop producing enough food to support everyone. And here's a fun little detail that tends to blow people's mind. Some researchers estimate that certain nomadic groups covered well over 1,000 miles collectively across a single year once you factor in all this seasonal movement layered on top of the regular daily foraging trips. 1,000 miles on foot, with no rest days built into a calendar, because the calendar itself was made of walking. Now, let's pause on something, because there's a version of this video that just lists reasons and moves on, but that misses the actual interesting part. All that walking didn't just get people from point A to point B, it built them. Quite literally, walking that much for that long, generation after generation, shaped the human body into what it is today. Let's talk bipedalism for a second, because standing and walking on 2 legs is genuinely one of the strangest choices evolution ever made for a primate. Most of our close relatives, chimps, gorillas, orangutans, get around on all 4s at least part of the time, because 4 legs are more stable, distribute weight better, and honestly make more mechanical sense for moving through trees and uneven ground. Humans went the other way entirely, and one of the leading explanations ties directly back to everything we've already talked about. Long-distance travel across open landscapes rewards efficiency over raw speed. Walking upright on 2 legs uses dramatically less energy per mile than moving on all 4s. It's not about being fast, it's about being able to keep going hour after hour without running out fuel. Evolution essentially optimized the human body for a marathon, not a sprint, because the marathon was daily life. And once you're committed to walking that much, other adaptations start stacking on top. Our leg joints, our spine curvature, the specific shape of our hips and feet, the springy arch that acts almost like a natural shock absorber with every single step. These aren't random. These are engineering solutions to the problem of moving a human body enormous distances without it breaking down. Even our feet themselves tell the story. The human foot has 26 bones, more than 30 joints, and an intricate network of tendons acting like a leaf spring, storing and releasing energy with every stride to make walking more efficient. That's not the design of a species meant to sit in a chair for 8 hours a day. That's the design of a species meant to be constantly, relentlessly on the move. Here's a question worth sitting with. If walking huge distances was so essential, why didn't ancient humans just find a way around it? Why not invent wheels sooner, or domesticate transport animals earlier, or just, decide to stay put? The honest answer is that for most of human history, the technology and the ecological knowledge simply weren't there yet. And frankly, walking worked. It wasn't broken, so there was no urgent pressure to fix it. The wheel is a genuinely brilliant invention, but it's not actually that useful without decent roads or domesticated animals strong enough to pull a load, and both of those things came relatively late in the human story, tens of thousands of years after our ancestors were already covering vast distances on foot as a matter of routine. And staying put simply wasn't an option in most environments. A group that decided to plant itself in one spot and refuse to move would very quickly exhaust the local food and water within walking distance, and then face a much worse choice than a long hike, which is starvation. Walking wasn't the hard option compared to staying still. Staying still was the actual death sentence. Walking was survival with extra steps. Literally. Let's shift gears for a moment, because there's a social layer to all this walking that rarely gets talked about. And it's honestly fascinating. All that shared movement, hunting parties walking together, whole groups relocating together, generations of families following the same seasonal routes, it wasn't just physically demanding, it was socially binding. Group foraging and hunting required coordination. You couldn't just wander off solo for 20 miles without a plan, or without trusting the people around you to hold up their end. Long walks became long conversations. Teaching moments where knowledge got passed from experienced elders to younger members. Oral histories got repeated, skills got demonstrated in real time. The walk itself became the classroom, the meeting room, and honestly the social glue holding these communities together. There's something almost poetic about that. The very activity that seems purely physical, exhausting, transactional even, doubles as the thread weaving human culture together. Stories about where the good water sources are, warnings about dangerous terrain. Jokes probably, because humans have always had a sense of humor. Even while sweating through a 15-mile trek chasing an antelope that clearly doesn't want to be dinner. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Now let's talk about what happens when all this changes, because the contrast is honestly kind of jaw-dropping. Agriculture shows up roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, and it's often framed as this massive leap forward for humanity. And in a lot of ways it absolutely was. Reliable food surplus, permanent settlements, eventually cities, writing, all of it traces back to that shift. But here's the part that gets glossed over. Agriculture, for the average person, actually meant less overall daily movement variety, even though farming itself is exhausting physical labor. You're no longer covering 10 or 20 miles chasing food across a landscape. You're working the same plot of land, day after day, season after season. The type of movement changed dramatically, shifting from long distance, varied terrain, walking toward repetitive, localized labor. And skeletal evidence backs this up in a pretty striking way. Researchers comparing the bones of hunter-gatherer populations to early agricultural populations have found noticeable differences, including changes in bone density and leg strength patterns consistent with a shift away from that constant long-range walking lifestyle. Farming communities, despite working incredibly hard, generally covered far less ground than their foraging ancestors did. So even 10,000 years ago, humans were already taking their first steps, pun fully intended, away from the 20-mile-a-day lifestyle that had shaped our bodies for hundreds of thousands of years before that. Fast forward to today, and the gap is almost comedic, if it weren't a little concerning. The average adult in a modern industrialized country walks somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 steps a day, which works out to roughly 1.5 to 2 miles. Compare that to the estimated 10 to 20 miles our ancestors covered regularly, and you're looking at a lifestyle shift that happened in what amounts to an evolutionary blink of an eye. Our bodies, remember, were built, quite literally engineered by natural selection, around an assumption of daily heavy movement. And now most of us spend our days moving from a chair to a car seat to another chair to a couch, covering the grand total distance of maybe the length of a shopping mall. This mismatch between what our bodies expect and what modern life actually delivers is something researchers have connected to a whole range of health issues, from cardiovascular problems to metabolic disorders. Now, that's not to say you personally need to go recreate a Paleolithic foraging trek every day. That would be a little dramatic and honestly kind of impractical if you have a 9 to 5 and a car in the driveway. but it does put a modern step goal into some pretty humbling perspective. That 10,000 steps a day target that fitness apps love to push at you, about 5 miles, would have looked like a slow, lazy morning stroll to someone living 20,000 years ago before they'd even really gotten started on the day's actual business. There's another angle worth mentioning here because it flips the usual framing on its head a little. We tend to think of ancient humans as having it rough, and physically, sure, that constant walking was demanding, but there's growing research suggesting that this kind of consistent, low to moderate intensity movement, spread across the entire day rather than crammed into one sweaty hour at a gym, might actually be closer to what human bodies are genuinely optimized for. Not brutal, all-out, occasional intensity, but steady, near constant motion. Modern exercise culture often treats movement like a discrete task, something you check off a list once a day, and then you're done, free to sit for the remaining 23 hours. Ancient life didn't work that way at all. Movement was woven continuously through the entire day, walking to a foraging spot, standing and working while gathering, walking back, walking to check on the group, walking to fetch water, more walking, some more walking after that. It's less like a single workout and more like an entire lifestyle built on top of a walking foundation. And that distinction actually matters quite a bit, at least according to some researchers studying sedentary behavior. Sitting for long, uninterrupted stretches appears to carry health risks somewhat independent of how much formal exercise a person gets elsewhere in the day, which means someone who runs 5 miles in the morning but then sits at a desk for the remaining 10 hours isn't necessarily replicating the movement pattern our bodies evolved around, even though they're clearly getting plenty of exercise by modern standards. Ancient humans, by contrast, simply never had the option to sit still for 10 hours. Their entire day was structured around continuous, low-grade physical activity punctuated by short rests, not the other way around. Let's bring this back around to something a little more personal, because it's easy to talk about ancient humans in the abstract as some distant, blurry group of people in animal skins, but they were obviously just people. People with sore feet sometimes. People who probably complained about long walks in ways not that different from how we complain about a long commute today. People who developed calluses, who knew exactly which terrain to avoid, who probably had inside jokes about that one guy in the group who always walked too slowly. There's something genuinely humbling about realizing that the 20-mile day wasn't some heroic feat reserved for elite hunters or explorers. It was the baseline. It was Tuesday and Wednesday, and pretty much every day after that, for essentially the entire 200,000 plus year run of anatomically modern humans, right up until an almost negligible sliver of time at the very end of that timeline. Farming, and cities, then cars, then desk jobs slowly chipped away at that constant motion piece by piece, until we landed here, in a world where walking a single mile can feel like a genuine accomplishment worth bragging about on a fitness. So why did ancient humans walk 20 miles a day? Because food required it, water required it, the seasons required it, hunting required it, and survival simply left no other option on the table. And in walking that far, that often, for that unbelievably long stretch of evolutionary time, they ended up shaping the very bodies we're all still walking around in today, whether we're covering 20 miles or barely 2. It's a strange kind of inheritance when you think about it. Every joint in your legs, every arch in your feet, every drop of sweat that cools you down on a hot day. All of it exists because your ancestors needed to walk relentlessly just to make it to tomorrow. And now here you are, probably sitting down while watching this, which honestly, they'd probably find a little baffling, considering how hard they worked to make sure your legs actually function properly. Maybe that's worth a short walk today. Just a thought. Your ancient ancestors would probably approve right after they finished being deeply confused about what a phone is.